Viktor Belenko was not an ordinary Soviet pilot. He was elite among the elite, one of only a few hundred pilots selected to fly the MiG-25 Foxbat. He had access to the Soviet Union's most valuable secret, and he hated everything about it. He had been planning for years. He memorized maps. He calculated fuel consumption. He identified the only route that could take him into Japanese airspace. A single mistake, a single moment of suspicion would get him shot. That morning, he took off for a routine training flight. He gave normal reports to his tower. Then he switched off his radio, dropped to low altitude, and glided toward the Sea of Japan. Behind him, Soviet radars went insane. Interceptors scrambled. But it was too late. Belenko had crossed the border. When the Kremlin learned that night, the reaction was pure rage. It was not just a pilot who had defected. The Soviet Union's greatest military secret had fallen into enemy hands. This is the story of the most damaging defection in Soviet aviation history, and how one man's hatred of the system exposed the greatest lie of the Cold War. To understand what Belenko stole, you must first understand what the West believed about the MiG-25. In the late 1960s, American intelligence detected something alarming. Soviet test flights were reaching speeds and altitudes that seemed impossible. Mach 3, 80,000 feet, numbers that exceeded anything in the Western arsenal. Satellite photographs captured blurry images of a massive twin-engine fighter. It had enormous wings, huge vertical stabilizers, and an aggressive, predatory silhouette. Western analysts gave it a code name, Foxbat. The implications were terrifying. If the Soviets could build an aircraft this fast, they could intercept the SR-71 Blackbird. They could shoot down American bombers before they reached their targets. They could dominate any air war. Pentagon planners went into crisis mode. The existing American fighters, the F-4 Phantom and F-106 Delta Dart, were completely outclassed. Something new was needed, something that could match the Foxbat. The result was the F-15 Eagle program. Billions of dollars were allocated. The most advanced avionics, the most powerful engines, the most sophisticated weapon systems, all designed to counter a single Soviet aircraft. But there was a problem. Everything the West knew about the MiG-25 was based on speculation. Blurry photographs, radar tracks, fragments of intercepted communications. No Western intelligence officer had ever seen one up close. No Western engineer had ever examined its systems. The Foxbat was a ghost, a terrifying ghost that haunted Pentagon briefing rooms and drove defense budgets to unprecedented heights. And then Viktor Belenko decided he had had enough. Viktor Ivanovich Belenko was born in 1947 in Nalchik, a small city in the Caucasus Mountains. His childhood was difficult. His mother abandoned the family when he was 2 years old. His father, construction worker, struggled to raise him alone. From an early age, Belenko dreamed of flying. He watched military aircraft pass overhead and imagined himself in the cockpit. Aviation represented escape, freedom, a life beyond the grinding poverty of Soviet provincial existence. He excelled in school and won admission to the Armavir Higher Military Aviation School. He graduated with honors and was selected for fighter training. His skills were exceptional. His political reliability was unquestioned. By 1971, Belenko was assigned to fly the MiG-25. This was an extraordinary honor. The Foxbat was the Soviet Union's most secret weapon. Only the most trusted pilots were allowed near it. But trust was exactly what Belenko was about to betray. The problems began almost immediately. Belenko had believed the propaganda. He had believed that the MiG-25 was the world's most advanced fighter. He had believed that Soviet technology was equal to or better than the West. The reality was shocking. The MiG-25 was fast, yes. It could reach speeds that no other operational aircraft could match. But it was not a fighter. It was an interceptor, a blunt instrument designed for one purpose only: to fly in a straight line, very fast, and shoot down enemy bombers. In a dogfight, it was nearly useless. The aircraft was so heavy that it could barely turn. The engines consumed fuel at a catastrophic rate. At full afterburner, the MiG-25 could drain its tanks in minutes. And the technology inside was not advanced at all. Belenko saw vacuum tubes where Western aircraft had transistors. He saw crude analog systems where the West had digital computers. The radar was powerful, but primitive. The weapon systems were a generation behind. The greatest fighter in the world was a fraud. If you want to discover the secret technologies and untold stories of the Cold War, subscribe to our channel. We bring you new content every week. Belenko's disillusionment extended beyond the aircraft. Life in the Soviet Air Force was miserable. The pilots lived in decrepit barracks. The food was terrible. Spare parts were constantly in short supply. Aircraft that should have been flying sat on the ground waiting for repairs that never came. Corruption was everywhere. Officers stole supplies and sold them on the black market. Maintenance crews falsified records to meet impossible quotas. Safety was an afterthought. Belenko watched friends die in preventable accidents. Aircraft crashed because of faulty equipment. Pilots were killed because proper procedures were ignored. The system that was supposed to protect them was killing them instead. The political atmosphere was suffocating. Political officers monitored every conversation. Pilots were expected to attend endless ideological lectures. Any hint of dissent, any questioning of the system could end a career, or worse. Belenko began to see the entire Soviet system as a lie. The workers' paradise was a prison. The mighty military machine was held together with wire and prayers. The great socialist experiment was rotting from within. He started to think about escape. The idea was insane. No Soviet pilot had ever successfully defected with a frontline combat aircraft. Security was overwhelming. Every flight was monitored. Every pilot was watched. But Belenko had advantages. He was trusted. He had access. And he was patient. For years he studied. He memorized the locations of Soviet radar stations along the Pacific coast. He calculated the fuel consumption required to reach Japan. He identified gaps in the air defense network that might allow a low-flying aircraft to slip through. He told no one. Not his wife, not his friends, not anyone. A single word to the wrong person would mean death. By 1976, Belenko was stationed at Chuguyevka, an airbase in the Soviet Far East. The base was home to a regiment of MiG-25 interceptors. It was also within striking distance of Japan. The geography was challenging. The Sea of Japan lay between Soviet territory and freedom. Soviet radar coverage was extensive. Air defense interceptors could scramble within minutes. Belenko identified his window. If he flew at extremely low altitude, below 200 meters, he could stay beneath most radar coverage. The terrain along the coast was mountainous, creating radar shadows that a skilled pilot could exploit. The destination would be Hokkaido, the northernmost of Japan's main islands. It was close enough to reach on a single tank of fuel. Japanese air defenses were less aggressive than Soviet ones. If he could reach Japanese airspace, he had a chance. The timing had to be perfect. He needed a training flight that would take him over the Sea of Japan. He needed weather conditions that would help conceal his escape. He needed to avoid suspicion until the very last moment. On September 6, 1976, all the pieces aligned. The morning began like any other. Belenko reported for duty. He attended the routine briefing. He filed his flight plan for a standard training mission. At 10:21 in the morning, his MiG-25 roared down the runway and lifted into the gray Siberian sky. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. Belenko followed his assigned flight path. He made the expected radio calls. Soviet ground controllers tracked his progress without concern. Then he made his move. At approximately 10:40, Belenko's MiG-25 suddenly dropped off Soviet radar. The controllers were confused at first. Radar glitches happened. Perhaps there was equipment malfunction. They tried to re-establish contact. When they failed, confusion turned to alarm. An aircraft was missing. Not just any aircraft, a MiG-25. the most secret weapon in the Soviet arsenal. Emergency procedures activated. Search aircraft launched. Ground stations scanned frantically for any sign of the missing plane. But Belenko was already gone. He had dropped to an altitude of just 30 meters above the waves. At that height, MiG-25 was invisible to Soviet radar. The Sea of Japan was calm. The sky was overcast. Conditions were perfect. He flew southeast at maximum speed compatible with low-altitude flight. The fuel gauge dropped steadily. He had calculated his range precisely. There was almost no margin for error. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every second, he expected to see Soviet interceptors appear on his tail. Every moment, he waited for the radio call ordering him to return. Every heartbeat could be his last. But no interceptors came. The radio remained silent. The Soviet air defense network had lost him completely. After approximately 40 minutes of flight, Belenko saw the coast of Hokkaido emerge from the haze. He had made it. He was in Japanese airspace. Now he had a new problem. He was desperately low on fuel. He needed to land immediately, and he had no idea where to go. Japanese air traffic control had detected the unidentified aircraft. 2 F-4 Phantom interceptors from the Japan Air Self-Defense Force scrambled to investigate. They found the MiG-25 flying erratically, clearly searching for somewhere to land. The Japanese pilots tried to guide the Soviet aircraft toward Chitose Air Base, a military facility equipped to handle such situations. But Belenko could not understand their signals. His fuel was nearly exhausted. He was running out of options. Then he saw it. Hakodate Airport, a civilian field with a runway just barely long enough for his aircraft. He had no choice. He was going in. At 13:00 local time, the MiG-25 appeared over Hakodate without warning. The airport was not prepared for a supersonic interceptor. The runway was designed for small commercial aircraft and turboprops. There were fuel trucks on the tarmac. Civilian passengers were boarding flights. Belenko lined up his approach. He was coming in too fast. The MiG-25 had a landing speed far higher than anything Hakodate normally handled. He deployed his drag chute, but it was not enough. Aircraft hit the runway hard. Tires screamed. Smoke erupted from the brakes. The MiG-25 barreled down the runway at terrifying speed, heading straight for a cluster of vehicles at the far end. At the last possible moment, Belenko managed to steer the aircraft onto the grass beside the runway. The MiG-25 plowed through the soft ground, finally coming to rest just meters from a fuel truck. Airport workers stood frozen in shock. They had never seen anything like this aircraft. Its massive size, its aggressive lines, its red star markings left no doubt about its origin. Belenko popped the canopy and climbed out onto the wing. He raised his hands over his head. He had prepared a few words of English, learned from Voice of America broadcasts he had listened to illegally for years. "America," he shouted. "Take me to America. I am a pilot. I have information." Japanese security forces quickly surrounded the aircraft. Belenko was taken into custody. The MiG-25 was surrounded by armed guards. Within hours, the news had flashed around the world. A Soviet pilot had defected with a top-secret aircraft. The Foxbat was in Western hands. In Moscow, the reaction was nuclear. The Soviet government learned of the defection within hours. The response was immediate and furious. Diplomatic channels erupted. The Soviet ambassador in Tokyo demanded the immediate return of the aircraft and the pilot. "This is Soviet state property," he declared. "The pilot is a criminal who must face Soviet justice." The Soviets claimed that Belenko had suffered a mental breakdown. They insisted he had not defected voluntarily, but had become disoriented and accidentally strayed into Japanese airspace. They demanded his repatriation on humanitarian grounds. No one believed them. The Japanese government found itself in an impossible position. The Soviet Union was a powerful neighbor. Angering Moscow risked serious consequences. But the United States was Japan's most important ally. Washington desperately wanted access to the MiG-25. A delicate diplomatic dance began. Japan announced that it would conduct an investigation into the incident. The aircraft would need to be examined for safety reasons before any decisions could be made about its return. The Soviets understood exactly what this meant. Their most secret weapon was about to be dissected by their enemies. They responded with threats. Soviet naval vessels appeared in waters near Hokkaido. Military flights increased along the Japanese coast. The message was clear: return our aircraft or face consequences. Japan did not blink. The investigation would proceed. Meanwhile, Viktor Belenko was being debriefed by American intelligence officers who had flown in from Washington. What he told them was explosive. Belenko talked for weeks. He described everything: the MiG-25's capabilities and limitations, Soviet air defense tactics, pilot training procedures, the locations of air bases, the organization of fighter regiments. But his most valuable information was not about hardware. It was about the truth behind the Soviet military machine. The MiG-25 was not a superfighter, Belenko explained. It was a high-speed interceptor with severe limitations. It could fly fast in a straight line, but it could not maneuver. It consumed fuel so quickly that combat radius was extremely limited. The engines had to be replaced after only a few hundred hours of flight time. The sophisticated electronics that Western analysts had assumed must exist were not there. The radar was powerful but crude. The avionics were a generation behind. The fire control system was basic. Most shocking of all, the aircraft structure was not made of advanced titanium alloys, as the West had assumed. It was mostly steel. Heavy, ordinary steel. The Soviets had used steel because their industrial base could not produce titanium components in sufficient quantity. The terrifying Foxbat, the aircraft that had driven billions of dollars in Western defense spending, was essentially a hot rod, fast in a straight line, useless for almost anything else. Belenko also revealed the desperate state of Soviet military readiness. Spare parts were chronically short. Maintenance was inadequate. Pilots were undertrained because there was not enough fuel for proper flight hours. The mighty Soviet Air Force, which NATO planners assumed could sweep across Europe in days, was struggling just to keep its aircraft flying. This information was priceless. It reshaped Western understanding of the Soviet threat overnight. While Belenko was being debriefed, the MiG-25 was being dismantled. American and Japanese engineers worked together in a heavily guarded hangar at Hayakuri Air Base. They photographed every component. They measured every dimension. They analyzed every system. The examination lasted 67 days. Nothing was overlooked. The engines were removed and studied. The radar was powered up and tested. The flight control systems were mapped in detail. The findings confirmed everything Belenko had said. The avionics bay was filled with vacuum tubes, not transistors. Vacuum tubes were obsolete technology in the West, abandoned years earlier for solid-state electronics. The Soviets still used them because their electronics industry could not mass-produce reliable transistors. The radar was extremely powerful, designed to burn through enemy jamming. But it was also heavy, crude, and limited in capability. It could track a large bomber. It struggled with smaller, more agile targets. The engines were impressive in raw thrust, but astonishingly inefficient. Fuel consumption was so high that the MiG-25's effective combat radius was only a few hundred kilometers. It was a sprinter, not a marathon runner. The structural analysis revealed the most surprising secret. The aircraft was nearly 80% steel by weight. Only small portions were made of titanium or advanced alloys. The Soviets had compensated for the weight by adding more powerful engines, creating a vicious cycle of mass and fuel consumption. Western intelligence had spent years terrified of a paper tiger. On September 30, 1976, Japan announced that the examination was complete. The aircraft would be returned to the Soviet Union. It was shipped back in 30 crates, completely disassembled, every secret extracted. The Soviets were furious, but there was nothing they could do. The damage was done. Viktor Belenko was granted asylum in the United States. He was given a new identity and American citizenship. He wrote a book about his experiences that became an international bestseller. The Soviet Union tried him in absentia for treason. He was sentenced to death. Soviet intelligence reportedly made several attempts to locate and assassinate him. All failed. Belenko lived quietly in the United States for decades. He became an aerospace consultant, helping American companies understand Soviet aircraft design philosophy. He occasionally gave lectures about his experiences. He never expressed regret for his decision. In interviews, he described the Soviet system as fundamentally corrupt and doomed to collapse. He said he defected not just for personal freedom, but because he could no longer participate in a lie. The impact of his defection was enormous. Western military planning was transformed. The panic over Soviet air superiority evaporated. Defense budgets were reallocated. Programs designed to counter exaggerated Soviet capabilities were scaled back or redirected. The F-15 Eagle, developed specifically to counter the MiG-25 threat, turned out to be massively superior to its Soviet counterpart. American pilots who had trained to face a terrifying superfighter discovered they were actually facing an aircraft they could easily defeat. The psychological impact on the Soviet military was equally significant. The loss of the MiG-25 was deeply embarrassing. It revealed that Soviet secrecy, which had protected the illusion of technological superiority, could be pierced by a single determined individual. Security procedures were overhauled. Pilot monitoring was intensified. The entire Soviet military establishment became even more paranoid than before. But the fundamental problems Belenko had exposed could not be fixed by tighter security. The Soviet industrial base remained unable to compete with Western technology. The culture of corruption and falsified records continued. The gap between propaganda and reality only widened. 13 years after Belenko's defection, the Berlin Wall fell. 2 years after that, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. Belenko had seen it coming. He had seen the rot beneath the surface. He had understood that an empire built on lies could not stand forever. And he had taken the evidence to prove it.